with some major onions.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. Puts it up.
To the floor. Gets back. Duck under by Jeff Gray.
What is up? Welcome back to Ticking Gray Bomb, Refined Taste for Idiots. I'm idiot number one, Mace.
And I am the idiot du jour, Max. Happy St. Patrick's Day, Mace. We're recording on March 17th.
A celebration of all that is green. Not only is it St. Patty's Day, but we are on the cusp of a large tradition here in the States, March Madness. It is when there are 68 college basketball teams competing against each other in a very large tournament that takes place over 3 weekends. And we are going to take that format, take it to you in a horological sense, and let major watch brands compete against each other. It's only our opinions that count. It's really only Mex's opinion that count. We're just going to put one brand against each other, and then we're going to crown the champion.
Okay, guys, so a note on the methodology. So these brands were chosen at random. We used as our basis the Morgan Stanley Swiss Watch Report that came out, let's say, a month or so ago, and ranked Swiss watch brands by magnitude of sales. We called a little bit of an audible to spice it up a little bit, where we introduced some other brands, some non-Swiss brands. And we also incorporated a couple of wildcard games to increase the number from, let's say, 16 to, Mace, what would we say, about 20 or 22? Yeah, okay. So we kind of look at this not as necessarily a true seeded competition in a way, even though we're celebrating the timing of March Madness here. This is more, we could think about it as maybe like the European football, the championship seedings, particularly in the round of 16, where they're drawn at random. So there's a little bit of an amalgam here that we're going with.
All right, we're going to kick it off with, we're going to be in the North region. So you can see the 1 seed is Patek. Patek up against, actually what we're going to do is the 4 seeds. And so we have Too Much Money, No Taste category, where we put Richard Mille up against Hublot. So who do you got?
So this is an easy one. I'm obviously among the talking heads of the watch community. Lots of hatred for Hublot. I can't say I hate Hublot, but this is this is an easy one. Richard Mille doesn't produce a lot of watches, and it's very blingy. We could call this category, if you want, the battle of douchebaggery. And I think it's really no mystery that Richard Mille always wins that battle.
All right, good one. All right, so now we're going to head to the East region, where our 4 seed pairing is called Is It British? So we have Tudor versus Bremont.
Yeah, so I mean, if we think about, is it British? That's a great question. I mean, does anyone know? Bremont is one of those brands that seems to turn up at the low end of the luxury spectrum, but not a lot of folks really talk about Bremont. Whenever I've looked into their kind of positioning, nothing really jumps out at me as super exciting. On the other hand, we know that Tudor will always be Rolex's little brother. But I think most of us will recognize that the brand has made really great strides over the last 5 to 10 years in terms of trying to establish its own identity, right? To step out a little bit from Rolex's shadow. So I think this is a bludgeoning. This is a total blowout. Tudor destroys Bremont. Maybe not as the more British watch, but definitely as the better watch brand.
In the South, we have once legendary, now ignored, Blancpain versus Breguet.
So this is a tight matchup, right? I mean, both watch companies have produced some iconic pieces. Obviously, for Blancpain, it's easy to see that the 50 fathoms kind of overshadows everything. And I hope it gets a little bit of a bounce because of this collaboration with Swatch, right? That we saw last year. So both these brands, interesting thing, Mace, is both these brands are owned by the Swatch Group, in fact. We could say that, Blancpain is clearly the bigger of the two, having sold, I think, 28,000 units versus Breguet, which is not too far behind at 20,000 units last year. I think structurally, if we're just going on the basis of horology and the breadth of product line, I think Breguet takes this. This is a close battle of siblings, right? We could look at this as a kind of an interconference or an interleague rivalry. But I think Breguet wins here by a few points. It's a close game. Let's put it that way.
Now, the last of our playing games in the West. Am I a jewelry brand? Cartier versus Hermes.
So, Hermes has done some good things over the last few years. So this is an interesting category because in this conference, right, we could have also included the likes of Bulgari, the like of Harry Winston, right, Chanel,
Van Cleef and Arpels.
Absolutely, right. So there are a lot of other brands here. In a way, I kind of feel like Hermes, who's done some good things over the last few years, is kind of an upstart in the space relative to some of the other brands that we mentioned, particularly Bulgari with their Octo Finissimo. That was a bit of an upset for them to make it into this game. But I think it's because of the momentum they've created just over the last few years. But I mean, look, Cartier, we say it's a jewelry company. It is. It's really it's a true luxury brand owned by Richemont. They sold, citing Morgan Stanley, they sold 660,000 units in 2023. That's a big number, right? And we look at some of their product lines, things like the Santos, the Tank, the Ballon Bleu, the Roadster. There's a lot of iconography, serious watch iconography inside Cartier. I think, again, we have Hermes, an upstart player. Maybe this is close in the first half, but Cartier pulls away in the second half to win decisively.
All right, so we're going to start up back into the North region. We've got the 1 versus 4. We've got Patek versus Richard Mille.
So this is, this is a no-brainer. Patek is such a strong candidate. Now, we typically talk about them in the context of, luxury brand, true luxury brand, luxury watch brand. They're independent. I think they're certainly, by all means, they're the strongest from a horological standpoint of the independents, the larger independents, let's call it that. They sold 70,000 units in 2023. So certainly, some good presence. We talked about earlier kind of Breguet's numbers and Blancpain's numbers. So it's clearly above that as a reference point, well below, monsters like a Rolex or a Cartier or an Omega. And, again, what do we have to say about, Patek? Really iconic kind of brands within that maison. You look at the Calatrava, the Nautilus, the Aquanaut, not to mention the real big boys of the portfolio with things like the Grand Complication. So this is a total, razing to the ground, barn burning. Patek crushes Richard Mille and leaves them in the dust.
The next matchup in the North is Audemars Piguet versus Omega. Omega.
Yes. So this is a really interesting matchup, right? And I think you have the structural icons of the Omega portfolio, right? The Speedmaster and the Seamaster, right? And all the kind of cultural value that comes with that, right? I mean, the James Bond the first watch to the moon, right? I mean, it's so strong. We know they're part of the Swatch Group, right? They sold 570,000 units in 2023, so they're a big boy from a production standpoint. Okay, and Mace, I think you've made the comment before that it feels like everything in their portfolio stems from those two macro collections, right? You look at the Planet Ocean, right, or whatever, the Aquaterra. They all kind of come from Seamaster, right? And then you have some other things, like the Rail Masters, things like this. But ultimately, those are the two brands. And it's a similar story on the other side of the field, right? And when you look at Audemars Piguet, you're talking about a company with a rich history. But structurally today, we look at them really as a Royal Oak offshore company, right? We could talk about their kind of dress watches. We could talk about the Code watch that was released a few years ago. But I think everything revolves around, with Audemars, for sure, everything revolves around the Royal Oak and the Royal Oak offshore, right? And I think that's going to be a limitation for both of these teams. So you have basically you have two great players playing two great players, and the other folks are, in their role. They may be watching. I think in this match, we have to go with Audemars Piguet over Omega, because I think their best players are just better than Omega's best players.
All right, so moving on to the East, our 1 versus 4 is Lange and Tudor.
So, this is not a game. I think you might watch this game for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then it's totally out of control, right? I mean, Lange, is really at the height of the haute horlogerie movement, we can call it, that market space. They're only producing 5,000 or 6,000 watches a year, but across several really complicated product lines. Okay, you look at the Lang 1, you look at the piece that we previewed, showcased in our German watch video, the 1815 annual calendar. You look at the Datograph. This company has really come a long way to establish itself at the very height of the watchmaking industry. Okay, and yes, it's German. It's owned by Richemont, so not truly independent, but I think true collectors recognize the strength of the Lange offering, right? So this is a total. I think this is even more lopsided than the battle we saw between Patek and Richard Mille. Again, I think this is competitive for only the very beginning before Lange just finds another gear and runs away with this. So Lange is the uncontested winner of this matchup.
All right, the 2-3 matchup is Vacheron Constantin versus Grand Seiko / Seiko.
So I think it's a tough matchup for Seiko Grand Seiko, right? I mean, we all know that the Grand Seiko fanboys may not like this, matchup because they're not allowed to flex some of their strengths, right? Seiko has become an incredible player in the watch industry over the last, call it 50 years. I think they've done a great thing with Grand Seiko, right? In order to project their presence up into this luxury space. You talk about the Zaretsu polishing, you talk about the complications, you talk about these beautiful dials that Grand Seiko in particular has developed. And it's a really nice offering. I just don't think, they have any chance against a player like Vacheron, who's really, we can call them the OG Swiss watchmaker, right? I mean, they were founded in 1755. It's a nice number for production for them. It's 35,000 units a year. But when you look at their, the scope of their portfolio, a lot of folks have been going crazy, in the sports watch craze about the overseas. But you look at their Traditionnel, you look at their Historique, right? In particular, that American 1921, which is kind of like a roadster, just a beautiful watch. And for me, it's the Métier d'Art, right? When you look at the tribute to great civilizations, some of these kind of limited collections that are that really showcase incredible dial work. I think this is the worst possible competition for Grand Seiko. Maybe you see some kind of punches being exchanged, blow for blow in the first half, but Vacheron crushes Seiko and Grand Seiko. Yeah.
In the South region, Tag a surprising 1 seed versus Brigade.
So, we know that there are Tag fanboys out there. And I think Tag's tried very hard over the last couple of years to recapture what it had in the 80s and 90s. Again, you look at iconic brands. I mean, the Monaco is one of the most iconic kind of racing brands over the last, call it 60 to 70 years. But Tag's, I think, structurally been lost for the last 15 to 20 years. I think, I don't think from a horological standpoint they can compete with Breguet. And so I think Breguet, we could say based on the random seeding pulls off an upset, but I think Breguet is a worthy winner.
Continuing in that bracket, Panerai versus JLC.
So this is a good matchup. I mean, we saw earlier the matchup of two Swatch brands or brands from the Swatch family. And here we're seeing a matchup of two Richemont brands. Okay. Look, we have, Panerai, which is kind of like some of the other brands we've showcased. Is it a one-trick pony, right? It's a good trick. You got one really strong player, but who have you put around him or her, right? And then on the other side, you have the watchmaker's watchmaker, right? JLC is a really studly brand. Now, one of the things that surprised me is that they sold almost 100,000 units last year. That's a decent size for a company that specializes in high precision watchmaking, right? And we look at their brands or, the presence across their portfolio, things like the Reverso, which is truly iconic. I mean, one of the most iconic pieces ever produced. Anvox, the Polaris. Mace, I know you're a fan of some of the duometer pieces, as am I. Beautiful timepieces. I think at this stage, JLC absolutely manhandles Panerai here and wins very comfortably.
I agree. So in the West, we have your boy IWC versus Rolex.
So I am a fan of IWC, right? And in a way, they're I kind of like the Vacheron story. I feel like a lot of their oxygen gets taken up by talk about the pilot, but they have a pretty complete line. When you look at the Ingenieur kind of dive watch, you look at the Portugueser kind of and Portofino dress watches. They really have nice presence. Okay. And the market kind of validates that, they sold 137,000 units last year. Right. So good amount of sales for kind of a mid-market luxury brand. But again, they're going up against a behemoth. So again, maybe we could see the first half being somewhat competitive, but Rolex fanboy or not, there's no way Rolex doesn't win this matchup.
All right, moving on to the 1-4 matchup, we've got Breitling versus Cartier.
Breitling known for, having that strong kind of either terrestrial racing or aerial racing theme. And I think it does really well to be faithful to that theme. I think from a branding standpoint, it has that for sure. And again, we've seen ups and downs for Breitling's popularity. They're definitely going the route of opening their own boutiques, right? The mono brand boutique to start appealing directly to that type of consumer. But again, we talked about the iconic power of Cartier's product line, and I don't think Breitling can be competitive here. Cartier advances very easily.
All right, we're back in the north where we have Patek versus Audemars Piguet, two powerhouses.
Yeah, two powerhouses. You can call them, you could say, depending on how you look at the Holy Trinity. It could be two Holy Trinity pieces, going head to head here. And I think ultimately, what we talked about in the first round matchup against Omega for AP, those limitations really are made evident here, right? Patek exposes the weaknesses of the lack of depth across AP's portfolio, right? So I think Patek wins rather easily here and advances.
All right, so now we head to the East. We have Lange and Vacheron.
So this is the real powerhouse matchup. I mean, in a way, you could say this could be a final matchup of two incredible watchmakers. Again, depending on how we want to look at Lange, right? A newer German upstart. I mean, they're categorically German, but this is truly a quality player, right? And Vacheron as well, right? I mean, again, depending on how you look at the Holy Trinity, they're also a part of that, right? Their heritage is second to none, and the breadth of their portfolio, right? Their product line is also remarkable, right? So I think it's tough, right? You look at a producer in Lange who's making 5,000 to 6,000 units a year, who's part of Richemont, right? You look at Vacheron, also part of Richemont, making 35,000 units a year. So scale is significantly different. I mean, I think that's ultimately what allows Vacheron to prevail here. JLC, such a strong offering. I don't think Breguet, despite their horology, despite the heritage, can really play with JLC. I think we have to rank JLC above Breguet, and they advance here.
And in the West region, we have the top two players from Morgan Stanley's report. We have Cartier versus Rolex.
So, again, we talked about Cartier. Great performance for them in this tournament, right? They advanced pretty far as a wild card, right? Or a play-in from a playing game, but they can't hold a candle to Rolex. Let's be honest. In terms of the branding, in terms of the breadth of the portfolio, right? We talked about the iconic pieces within Cartier's portfolio. The Santos is great. The Tank is great. They can't hold a candle to the Sub, right? Or the Datejust, right? So I think, again, this is one of those matchups, maybe good competitive first half, but Rolex pulls away and wins convincingly here.
Good. All right. So our final four is Patek, Vacheron, JLC, and Rolex. So in the first semifinal game, we have Patek versus Rolex.
So I'm sure there are some Rolex fanboys who may be pissed at this. But again, I mean, we look at this as a question of quality versus quantity. Okay. Rolex, a lot of folks really question whether Rolex should belong in a pantheon of luxury watch brands, right? This is a company that started by building the ultimate tool watches, right? And remarkably so, right? You look at the Explorer with, Edmund Hillary, and Tenzin Norgay. You look at the Sub, you look at, these other lines. They were tool watches. They were designed, Milgauss, right? I mean, it's like 1,000, designed to withstand 1,000 Gauss. The GMT, right? This allows Rolex to be relevant in a lot of different contexts. The presence of Rolexes in the market really certainly lead me to question, is this a luxury piece? Is this a luxury timepiece, right? Because it's so available. And I think that ultimately does it in here, right? When we look at Patek producing 70,000 truly luxury hot horology pieces for the most part, right? At the higher end of their line, I think this is a bloodbath. I think Patek crushes Rolex. Yeah, so in the end, Patek crushes Rolex to advance to the finals.
In the other bracket, we have Vacheron versus JLC. Who do you got?
So, again, yet another head-to-head matchup of Richemont brands. And again, for the reasons that we mentioned before, I mean, it's hard to stand in front of Vacheron. JLC, certainly had a good run, a worthy run. I don't think there are any upsets for JLC up to this point, but their road ends here at the hands of Vacheron.
All right, our finals: Patek versus Vacheron.
Madness. So this is a fun matchup, but this is not a competitive matchup, right? Vacheron has left the best on the field over the last however many matchups, but they really can't compete with the likes of a Patek. They're just a notch below. Despite the fact, as we've said, they're part of the Holy Trinity. I think there's a big difference between a Patek and a Vacheron. I think with great ease, Patek claims the championship, and deservedly so.
It's hard to argue. Absolutely.
I mean, again, right. It's not. I can't take a big. This is not a big leap. When you look at this, even when starting out, it's hard not to crown Patek as champion. But they were put through the paces, and I think they're a worthy champion.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for taking a peek at this timepiece tournament of champions, where Patek emerged victorious. And if you like this content or any of the other content on our channel, please consider subscribing and give us a like. And we will see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.